It's officially after July 4th, which means Happy Halloween. You are listening to the Anxious at Bedtime podcast. I'm your host, Monica. Unfortunately, you're stuck with just me today, but I have some more Reddit stories for you. And I can't lie, talking to myself like this feels very awkward, so let's get right into it. Our first story is from Willing Koala 4111. This happened a few years ago, and I still can't explain what happened. I apologize for the length, but this all happened over the span of multiple days, and I want to provide proper context so you all can understand why we came to the conclusion we did. My family went on a mini vacation for my dad's birthday. We live in NorCal and had decided to take the small trip to a very small beach town off Highway 1. It was a beautiful multi-unit Airbnb that was positioned not too far from an ocean cliffside. When I got out of the car, I immediately felt strange. My brother said he felt a weird vibe from the property as well, but we chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar area so late at night and chose not to say anything to our parents. It was about midnight, so we quickly unpacked and went to sleep. The next morning, I finally got to get a proper look at the whole property, and although I thought it was breathtakingly beautiful, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being deeply unsettled. There was a Hobbit-style structure built into the side of a hill that had a big handwritten sign that stated, "Do not enter," a huge barn/workshop that we were told not to enter by the owner of the property, 3 different units, and a flat wooden lookout structure right next to the cliffside that had 0 barriers. My brother and I were staying in the smallest unit. My parents and 2 family friends were staying in the largest unit, and nobody even went inside the last unit. We didn't initially plan on avoiding the last unit altogether, but after the incident, we all felt like that unit didn't need to be explored. The only strange occurrence that happened on the first day was that my dad and his friend swear they saw a figure in the window of the barn. There wasn't a host staying on the property with us, so it really startled them, and it led them to investigate. First thing to note is that when they approached the barn, the figure was still in the window, completely motionless. They both thought it could be a tarp or a coat rack, considering they didn't note any movement, but they still wanted to investigate to make sure. They saw the figure in the window that was positioned near the apex of the roof, so when they walked up to the barn and saw there was only 1 story, they immediately were very perplexed by what they were seeing. They walked back a few steps to look inside the window again, but now nothing was there. No figure, nothing. They both got spooked and tried to investigate further, but all the doors were locked and they never came up with a proper explanation. During the day, we went on a hike and shopped around the local shops. At one of the stores, they had a variety of jade jewelry. I randomly felt very inclined to buy something. I don't tend to wear a lot of jewelry due to my sensory problems, but I just felt very drawn to buying this bracelet with a large jade gemstone. The storekeeper told me that jade was a protection stone and that it will protect me when I choose to wear it. I immediately put it on and didn't plan on taking it off anytime soon. I found it brought me comfort knowing I was protected. This is important context that will make much more sense eventually. That night, we all started talking about the weird vibe of the property and discussed what we thought was causing it. I told everyone a big red flag for me was that my dog refused to enter the unit that my brother and I were staying in. He has separation anxiety and normally would never willingly leave my side, but he actively avoided entering the unit. He would stand outside the unit and watch me instead of sitting with me inside. I dragged him inside a few times, but every time he would start scratching at the door to leave, so I stopped trying. I assumed he maybe wanted to have access to all the family members, but it still felt uncharacteristic for him. In my unit, there was a couch that was positioned right in front of the sliding glass door that faced the cliffside. I was lounging on that couch while crocheting, attempting to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I was aware my dog was probably outside, but I don't normally feel unsettled by his lurking. So, I investigated with my brother. We scanned the area with flashlights and called my dog's name. He came running out of my parents' unit. We brought him back inside and asked them if he'd been there long. My mom said he had been in there with them for at least 20 to 30 minutes. I told her I felt like I was being watched through the sliding glass windows, but convinced myself and her that it was probably just anxiety. We all decided to lock up for the night and just went to sleep. The next day was fairly normal, nothing to note, until nightfall. I once again was crocheting on that couch, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't investigate this time. I just kept periodically looking up to make sure I didn't see anyone, and continued on crocheting. I ended up staying up much later than my brother. Therefore, I was all by myself with a sickening feeling that I just couldn't get rid of. At about 2 a.m., I just couldn't sit there any longer. I honestly felt really scared to go to sleep too, but at least I didn't feel on display while in bed. I locked all of the doors and even added a secondary lock to the sliding glass door. I used a wooden pole from a broom to make it so the door physically couldn't open without moving the pole. My bed was positioned right alongside the wall of the bedroom that my brother was staying in and was practically right in front of the stairs. I was not really in a bedroom. There weren't any doors or walls separating me from the downstairs. It was more like an open space that had a bed. I got into bed and was doom scrolling when I suddenly heard movement downstairs. It started with small footsteps, almost childlike, around the kitchen and living room. I could very distinctively hear the small thuds that almost sounded like skipping or dancing. Then I heard metal clinking sounds. It was as if someone was holding a metal utensil and dragging it along the surfaces downstairs. Then the dragging turned into tapping. I was fully frozen with fear at this point, and quite literally had no idea what to do. At no point did I hear any doors open or locks turn, so whatever was downstairs was probably in the house the whole time. I was petrified, just sitting there listening to the metal clank and the small footsteps. It just kept going, and I knew there was absolutely nothing in between me and whatever was making all that sound downstairs. Then the worst happened. I tried to adjust my position in bed, and my phone fell. The sound echoed through the house. I immediately went to pick it up while simultaneously hearing the footsteps abruptly stop. Then, to my horror, I hear the tiny footsteps running up the stairs. It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I grabbed my pillow and threw it over my head and just started saying, "Please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me," repeatedly. I honestly did not want to face whatever it was. I heard the footsteps run up all the stairs and right next to my bed. Then I started to feel a pressure on my pillow. Whatever it was potentially trying to suffocate me. I continued to plead through the pillow, and I found I genuinely could not move. I have no idea if I was so scared I literally froze or if something else was stopping me, but nevertheless, I lay there completely hopeless. This continued for a short while until I must have blacked out because I woke up the next morning in complete shock of what took place the night before, with no memory of what happened after feeling the pressure on my pillow. I ran to my parents' unit to tell them what I experienced, and they too had horrifying experiences the night before. My dad had moved to the couch halfway through the night because he was keeping my mom up with his snoring. My mom woke up a few hours later to who she thought was my dad standing at the foot of her bed. She casually asked what he was doing just standing there, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there watching over her. After feeling certain it wasn't my dad, she screamed. Once my dad came running in, the figure simply just vanished. She told my dad what she saw, and he said that he never even fell asleep because he kept hearing heavy footsteps walking through the house, sometimes sounding like it was right behind him. He said every time he turned to look at who it was, he never saw anything that could explain the footsteps. He couldn't get himself to relax enough to fall asleep, so he just laid there in the dark. Since it was already 4 a.m., they both stayed up watching movies and discussing what they experienced. My brother and the family friends didn't experience anything of note. They all know that we are skeptics and we aren't the lying for attention type, so they really didn't know what to make of what we claimed. The most damning thing that nobody could explain was that my jade bracelet had changed colors. It was a light milky green before, and now there was a large spot of the main stone that was a very dark green/black color. It wasn't on the surface of the stone either. We tried washing it. It was literally as if the color of the stone changed. Scientifically speaking, that can happen due to wear, temperature changes, skin oils, or lighting. But I had just bought it, and the color change didn't go away after being brought to different conditions. Spiritually speaking, some believe that stones can change after absorbing negative energy, almost like a sign that it has done its job. I became convinced that a man lived there and would kill kids. I know I was probably jumping to conclusions, but it all made so much sense. The house was so isolated, and the cliff was the perfect murder spot. I'm pretty sure my parents had an encounter with the killer, and I had one with the victim. It didn't even feel like a question at that point. It felt like I just knew deep down that evil things had happened on that property. I might sound crazy, but this was my experience. I think about this experience regularly, and don't talk about it much. Most people look at me crazy after sharing, so I just stopped talking about it. It was horrifying, and I most certainly believe in the paranormal now. So that is terrifying. I'm so glad that you bought that jade bracelet because it does sound like it absorbed something or protected you somehow. I don't even want to think about how much scarier it could have been if you didn't have that. As for the house being a murder spot, maybe that would make sense. But it almost feels like, and granted, I know nothing about nothing. I'm the first to admit that. But to me, it almost feels like maybe some sort of entity. And I don't know how old you were at the time, but it's as if this entity shifted to be more on your level. And then with your mom, it was more on her level by being an adult. I don't know. It freaks me out. But I'm so glad you are okay and your whole family made it out okay. Story number 2 is from Anonymous. I just thought I'd share one of my experiences. This happened in 2014. I was a fireman and was house sitting for my captain while he and his wife went on vacation to Hawaii. The job was simple: take care of the dogs and make sure the cow did not escape the property. My first day there, I noticed bowls all throughout the house with half-burned sage in them, but I didn't think much of it as he was Native American. Later into the evening, I kept getting the feeling of being watched or followed. I locked the house up and turned off the lights besides the hall light outside of the guest room door. I took the dogs in there with me, and one laid down at the foot of the bed and the other laid on my right side. I still had this really uneasy feeling, and I didn't understand why. I woke up at some point in the night to the sound of the dog that was laying by my side, growling very deeply. She was standing over me in bed, facing the door. I looked over, and there was a shadow figure staring at me with what looked like a hand on the doorknob. I froze and could not look away. After a couple of seconds, it slammed the door so hard that the bathrobe hanging on the back of the door started swinging. What was weird was almost as soon as it slammed the door, the dog laid back down like nothing happened. I jumped up and grabbed my pistol, walked the whole house, and every door and window was locked like I had left it. Also, I know a pistol wouldn't have done anything, but at the time, the only logical explanation in my mind was somebody had broken in. And that's the end of that story. I think what makes that story so scary to me is the fact that it seemed like the dog recognized the shadow figure. It seemed almost as if that's part of its routine. Something comes to the bedroom, it growls, it leaves, and the dog goes back to sleep. You know what I mean? Like it seemed used to it, and I don't like that. Story number 3, also anonymous. So as of now, I'm skeptical about many things considered paranormal. In fact, I find those ghost hunter TV shows to be eye-rolling. I just haven't seen good evidence to really sway me until this morning. And I'm 100% not making this up. I park my car and walk about a mile to work 5 days a week. Same spot, same walk to work, nothing changes. I pop in my AirPods, listen to Spotify, and walk. But this morning, as I walked to work, I felt my right AirPod pop out in mid-stride, and I turned my head to see if I could catch it. As I turned my head, I found myself looking at my reflection in the driver's side window of a car that's parked along the street. You have to remember this all happened in about a second or two, which is what really freaked me out. As my head was turned, I saw a very quick but very real flash of what looked like a person in a black hoodie rushing me from behind. Their reflection was in the rear seat window. Their arms were outstretched, reaching for me. I could only see the reflection from their waist up. No face and no clear view of their hands, just a fast-moving, dark blur that was definitely headed towards my back. I'm not an MMA fighter, but I do have decades of martial arts experience, so my right arm came up over the right side of my jaw and temple, basically the right side of my face. At the same time, I started to defensively roll backwards and cocked my left hand to throw a punch. So I was walking forward with my head turned to the right, then quickly spun around to defend myself. Are you getting the visual? I'm not sure if I'm describing it well. Anyway, I spin and see nothing. No person, no dark hoodie, no one is behind me. It was like 7:15 a.m. and there's no one. I almost fell over because of how fast I almost did a complete 360. I looked around to see if it was a bird or anything, and I'm telling you, there was nothing and no one around. I was totally freaked out because I was freaked out because I normally don't get freaked out. Not sure where this puts me on the spectrum towards believing in the paranormal, but I'm no longer at 0. So that story, I don't know. We have a lot of really creepy ones this time for sure. It almost sounds like I'm kind of hoping maybe a ghost was just trying to mess with you. Maybe it sensed that you don't believe in the paranormal and was trying to freak you out. Other than that, I don't know. It's very weird. Our fourth story comes from Negative Gundam 3800. Before you say this story sounds like a cliche, or I'm lying or something like that, just note this happened when I was 7 or 8 years old. So during that time, approximately 2010-ish, I was visiting my grandma's house while my grandpa was at the hospital. And yes, it's before he passed away. During that time, I was just looking at the TV when suddenly I saw my grandpa walking out from his bedroom and into the living room. I called my mom to ask her, "Why is grandpa here?" And she said, "He's at the hospital. What are you talking about?" Did I see my grandpa's ghost? Or was it something else like a tulpa or another entity? I've been keeping this at the back of my mind for years and I need an explanation for it. If anyone knows, please tell me. Thank you. So honestly, my best guess for what happened there would be residual energy, which is basically when somebody's energy from like something they do often, such as your grandpa walking out of his bedroom, it sort of sticks around. It's kind of like a haunting, but it's not actually a ghost or a spirit. It's literally just that person's energy from doing the same thing over so many times that it kind of just repeats, almost like a different timeline that's blending with ours, if that makes any sense. And if not, I'm sorry. My co-host is usually the one that's really great at explaining these type of things. He'll be back next week if that doesn't make any sense. Our fifth story comes from Connor. Me and my buddies were at a Boy Scout reservation in the Cumberland Mountains, and it's about 11 p.m. when me and one of my buddies hear running in the grass. So we tell the other 3 to shut up. We are by a lake, and all the frogs go dead silent. We decide that there's probably something out there, so we head to the closest shelter, which is a bathhouse, and we stay there for a while. One of them decides to leave, and when he comes back, his face is pale, and he's saying he saw a white figure floating in the trees about 20 feet in front of him. We still have no idea what that was. Truly, I have no idea what it could have been. It sounds scary. My first thought is, obviously maybe it's a ghost, but if you all felt like you needed to hide from it, I kind of feel like it was something more sinister. Maybe an alien, Who knows? But I'm glad you guys listened to your instinct and hid, and everyone was safe. Story 6 comes from Nico Kid 2006. I work nights in a building built over my city's old morgue. Something came up the stairs. I almost didn't post this, mostly because I know how it sounds. I work nights in an office building that everyone says was built over my city's old morgue. I've never actually confirmed that because honestly, part of me doesn't want to. It's one of those stories that gets passed around until nobody knows where it started anymore. Every old building has rumors. The problem is that almost everyone I work with has a story. One coworker says she saw someone standing at the end of the hallway after closing. She thought it was another employee until they turned the corner and disappeared. Another told me he heard footsteps coming up the stairs after he had already locked the door. One of the cleaners refuses to go into the basement alone. I used to laugh it off, not in a rude way. I just figured old buildings make old building noises. Pipes knock, vents hum, lights flicker. Your brain fills in the blanks when you're alone in the dark too long. Besides, I work alone more than anyone. If something were really there, I figured I would have seen it by now. For almost a year, I didn't. Every night was basically the same. Around 11, I'd lock the front entrance and check the offices. I'd make sure the washrooms were empty, glance out at the parking lot, then go back to my desk. Only my car would be outside. The buildings would settle around me, the lights would buzz, the vents would hum, and I'd work. Sometimes I'd get goosebumps for no reason. Sometimes one room felt colder than the rest, but nothing ever happened that I couldn't explain. Until last month. It was around 11:45 p.m. I had just finished my rounds. Front door locked, parking lot empty, washrooms empty, offices empty. I know I was alone. I sat back down at my desk and opened an email I'd been avoiding all night. That's when I heard it. the motion sensor. There's a sensor at the bottom of the main stairwell. When someone enters the stairwell, it makes one short chime. I looked toward the hallway and waited for the footsteps. Nothing. I waited a little longer. Still nothing. At first I was annoyed. I figured the sensor was glitching, so I got up and checked. The stairwell was empty, the hallway was empty, the front door was still locked. I even stepped outside and looked at the parking lot. No cars, no people, no movement. I checked the washrooms again, even though I already knew they were empty. Nothing. I went back to my office. That's when the building went quiet. The vents stopped humming. The lights stopped buzzing. The little clicks and creaks in the walls disappeared. It felt like someone had muted the whole building. I sat down slowly, and then I knew someone was behind me. Not thought, not imagined, I knew. Every instinct in my body told me there was someone standing directly behind my chair, close enough to read my screen, close enough that if I leaned back, I would touch them. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't see a shadow, but my body knew. I stared at my monitor. The dark edge of the screen showed a faint reflection of the wall behind me. Nothing there. I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't, because I was completely sure that if I looked, someone would be standing inches away from my face. So I kept staring forward. I kept trying to work. I read the same sentence over and over and over. My hand stayed on the mouse, but I didn't click anything. I remember realizing my shoulders hurt because I was tensing every muscle in my body. Every few seconds, I stopped breathing so I could listen. Listen for footsteps, for breathing, for a whisper. Anything. But nothing happened. That's the worst part. It didn't feel angry. It didn't feel like it wanted to hurt me. It felt curious. Like something had come up those stairs, followed me back to my office, and was now standing behind me just to see what I would do. I finally looked at the clock. 12:18 a.m. Over 30 minutes had passed. And the second I looked away from the monitor, the building came back. The vents started humming, the lights buzzed, something clicked inside of the wall, and the feeling behind me vanished. It felt like someone had stepped away. I spun around. There was nothing. The office was empty, the hallway was empty, the building was empty. I finished the shift because I didn't know what else to do. The next morning, I asked maintenance if the stairwell sensor had been acting up. One of the guys checked the log. It triggered once, he said. I asked what time, and he told me. 11:47 p.m. The exact time I heard it. Then he shrugged and said it was probably just a glitch. I tried to believe him. A couple weeks later, I finally told one of the older maintenance guys what happened. He worked there longer than anyone else. I expected him to laugh, but he didn't. He listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't ask about the sensor. He didn't ask if I was tired. He just looked toward the stairwell and said, "It stayed behind you, didn't it?" I froze. I hadn't told him that part. I asked him how he knew. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're lucky." I asked him, lucky how? He looked back at me and said, "Most people turn around." Before I could ask what that meant, someone called his name from down the hall, and he walked away. I've tried bringing it up 3 times since. Every time, he acts like he has no idea what I'm talking about. Nothing has happened since that night. No motion sensor, no cold spots, no strange silence. There haven't been any feelings of someone standing behind me, and most nights I can convince myself I imagined it. But I don't sit with my back to the door anymore. Every night before I start work, I pull my chair a little further away from the wall. I tell myself it's because it's more comfortable. But I've noticed something. I always leave just enough room behind me for someone to stand there. And I still don't know why. So I'm not gonna lie. It's very late, and I'm all alone. And that really freaked me out, so I'm gonna pretend like I did not just read that story, and we're moving on to the next one. This next story is from Anonymous. This story is 100% true according to my mom, and I wholeheartedly believe her. I also do have her consent to share this. To give a little backstory on the home that this takes place in. It was located in Cutler, California, an extremely small town with fields for miles. This house was in a very rural area, but the owner of this home owned a packing company, so weirdly, a packing building was located like right next to the house. It was found out after my mom moved out that the son of the man who owned the property was an addict, and he would often throw benders in the house where sadly many people would overdose and pass away. My mom believes that this was the reason why so many spirits wandered this home. Now to finally get into the story. My mom was about 7 or 8 years old when this happened. She said it was shortly after they had moved into the house. One day, her sister's boyfriend was exploring the fields behind the house when he found a medium-sized brown dog with big blue eyes. The dog was tied up with a rope and reeked of gasoline. He brought the dog back to the house and they washed it outside with the hose. My grandma told everyone that she didn't want to keep the dog inside if it had fleas. Later that night, while my mom was watching TV in the living room, either my uncle or my grandma spotted a tick on the dog. To get rid of it, my grandma sent my mom into the kitchen to grab the matches from the cabinet so they could kill the tick. To help you understand the layout a little better, the kitchen was attached to the dining room, which was basically made entirely of glass windows. The dining room was shaped kind of like a U and had a glass table in the middle. Since my mom was so young, she wasn't tall enough to reach the cabinet. So she had to climb onto the countertops to grab the matches, which meant she had to turn her back toward the dining room. After she grabbed the matches, she sat on the counter getting ready to jump down. As she looked up toward the dining room nook, she saw, standing across the dining table, was the devil. She said he had one human leg, while the other looked like a horse's leg. He was wearing a coat she described as having the structure of a blazer, but made from a knitted material. She said he looked mostly human, but parts of him were animal-like. And he was furry, like a goat. His hands looked human, but his nails were like a dog's, not unkempt, but as if a dog had recently gone to the groomers. She said they were like a candy corn shape. His face was thin, his eyes were sunken in, and the only way she could describe his face was evil. She said it was as if time had stopped. The air suddenly felt thick as they made eye contact. The devil raised his hand and beckoned for her to come to him. She said it felt as though he were speaking to her through her mind. She could hear him telling her to come to him, even though his mouth never moved. When she tried to respond, she couldn't speak. The only thing she could do was shake her head from side to side, refusing to go. He curled his finger again, motioning for her to come closer, this time nodding his head up and down, as if to say yes. After a while, my grandma realized my mom had been gone longer than expected and went to see what was taking so long. As soon as my grandma walked into the kitchen, my mom turned toward her and began pointing in the direction where she saw the devil. My grandma kept asking what was wrong, but my mom could only shake and point, completely unable to speak. My grandma later said it felt like my mom had a fever. Her skin was hot to the touch, yet she was shivering as though she were freezing. After a while, my mom finally managed to tell my grandma that there was a man in the dining room. Thinking someone had broken into the house, my grandma and uncle grabbed a bat and searched the backyard. But after my mom described the man as having one regular leg and one animal leg, my grandma realized what my mom had seen: the devil. So I have so many questions. But first of all, a really quick PSA. I know this summer is a really, really bad summer for ticks. And I recently found out that you aren't supposed to use matches or anything that makes the tick super uncomfortable, because that kind of sets them in a fight or flight and it'll make them throw up into whatever it's attached to. And that makes you more likely to get Lyme disease or whatever diseases a tick could be carrying. You're supposed to just grab tweezers and pull it straight up. I didn't know that. I also grew up just using matches, but yeah, apparently it's super dangerous. So just a little fun fact, I guess, and be careful. If any of you guys are going out into nature, make sure you check yourselves for ticks after, because it's a wild summer. But for the main part of the story, oh my gosh. So do you think the dog is related? Was the dog used to draw in somebody? Was the dog the devil? I don't know. I have so many questions. First of all, did you keep the dog after that? But that is terrifying, and I cannot imagine seeing that at such a young age, especially in your own home. I'm sure that brought on a lot of trauma. And tell your mom that I'm so sorry she had to see that, and give her a hug for me, because holy cow. Or wait a minute. Do you think maybe the dog was this sounds crazy. I need to go to sleep. But do you think maybe the dog was like a demon that escaped, and so Satan was there to collect his demon? You know what I mean? Because I feel like the dog has to be related to it, right? What are the odds? Did your mom ever see that again after that? Or did anyone else in your family ever see anything like that? Especially if they didn't keep the dog. I think that would be very interesting to know. But yeah, let me know. And if anyone else listening has ever seen anything like that, tell us. Email it to us, please. Our final story comes to us from Long Jumping Clue 572. My boyfriend and I have been on a road trip through Nova Scotia, and we were spending our final night of the trip at a walk-in site at a provincial park. It wasn't a super private site, and our tent was in clear view to anyone walking by, but it was in a secluded enough area of the campground that we opted to sleep with the fly off. At around 4 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like footsteps outside the tent. I was only half awake at this point and thought for sure I had imagined it. A couple minutes later, I woke again when my boyfriend reached out and grabbed my arm. Turns out, he had heard the footsteps too and thought it was me outside. We looked up and sure enough, a man was staring directly into our tent at us. We reacted immediately, loudly asking what the fuck he was doing, and he just walked away. Obviously, neither of us slept the rest of the night. I didn't think to check my tent zipper until we were actually getting out of bed a couple hours later, and the door on my side of the tent was completely unzipped along the bottom. We notified the campground staff first thing in the morning, but beyond that, I don't think there's anything we can or could have done in the moment to remedy the situation. That was not a fun way to spend our last night of vacation. We couldn't get out of there fast enough this morning, and we are very glad to be headed back home. Moving forward, I will be locking my zippers and probably won't be sleeping with a fly off anytime soon. Stay safe out there. So I had to include that one because it's summer, people are going to be camping, and just, it's a little reminder that sometimes the scariest encounters are not from ghosts or demons or anything like that, but from people. But like I said, that was our last story. Thank you for joining me on this solo episode. If you or someone you know has had a brush with the paranormal and would like to have that story read on the podcast, please email it to anxious@bedtimepodcast@gmail.com. If you liked what you heard here today, please give us a rate, a review, or whatever you can on whatever platform you're listening on. I'm gonna go hide under my covers now. Sleep tight.